Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight at Caring Tide. My name is Jenny Dopp, and we are so excited to have you all here. Tonight, we are talking about how to answer this really hard question that weighs on all of our hearts. What happens to my child when I'm gone? Or what happens to my child when I am no longer able to care for them? And it's just a matter of time before that happens for all of us as caregivers and as parents. And so I want to go through some resources that we have for you tonight to try to help you answer that question, to get you thinking about what your options are, and to help you start to formulate a plan. But before we start, I just want to read this information, this disclaimer. Caring Tide respects every individual's right to express who they are. In one-on-one discussions, we will use person-first or identity-first language based on the person's preference. In group settings, we will use a mix of the two in the hopes of having everyone feel like they are being included and respected. My name is Jenny Dopp, and I am the director of Caring Tide, and we are a disability planning organization. And in a sense, I'm your disability navigator. I can help your family identify the struggles that they're facing at this time and find resources to help you. And there's a few different areas that we want to focus on tonight, but let me start by introducing my family and why this is a personal journey for me. So this is a picture of my cute family. You will see my son Jackson there in the gray sweater vest. And Jackson has a rare chromosome duplication. It's called 7q11.23 duplication. And when Jackson was diagnosed, he was the first person in Utah, where I live, diagnosed, and he was the 11th person in the world. And so I definitely felt like I was on my own. I was given a one-sheet piece of paper by the geneticist and said, I'm so sorry, I don't have more information for you, but this is all we have. Best of luck, you know. And I just was kind of felt like I was on my own. But at the same time, he was 7 years old, and we had been searching for a diagnosis for him for several years. And because they had just mapped the human genome, we were able to finally identify that he had that chromosome duplication. And then later, other diagnoses followed: autism, ADHD, oppositional defiance, anxiety, a little bit of alphabet soup here in our house with all of the different abbreviations for disabilities. So this is definitely a personal journey for me because Jackson is now 23 and I am doing this as well. Life always changes and evolves, circumstances change, and so my plan has to continue to evolve as well. So that is a little bit about me. And we are an organization that serves families from across the United States. So whether you are up in Washington or down in Florida or, up in New England, we can find resources for you and help your family with this process. So don't worry if I'm in Utah and you're in Chicago. I've worked with families in Massachusetts and California, in Texas, all across the country, and this is something that we have a lot of experience doing, and we are happy to help you. Now, I want to throw this out there. We have a little gift for you tonight. If you stay until the end of this webinar, we'll watch to see in our notes who has stayed for the majority of the time, and we will send you this free gift. It's a free national directory. We have sourced information for every single state. So disability nonprofits, Medicaid information, Social Security, all of the information about disabilities that pertain to your state is located within this directory. And this is a great tool because, we never know if our circumstances will change. We have a lot of families that are in the military and they're moving around, and this has turned out to be a great resource for them. So stick around until the end and we will send that national resource directory to you. And the great thing about this is it's a living document, meaning I am in this document every day when I work with families. And as I find new resources for them, we will add it to the directory. So this is constantly being updated. If you find that you want to add additional information to it, just reach out to us and we'll make sure and add your resources to it as well. I want to introduce you to Caring Tide's founder. This is Brady Murray, and he's the founder of Caring Tide, and it's a very personal mission for him as well. He has 11 children, and he has adopted some, and he has biological children. And his son that's biological has a disability, and some of his adopted children have a disability as well. And so it's very personal to us. This is information that we are living and breathing, and things that we're working on every single day. So it's not just a business for us. This is a personal mission, and this is Brady's life mission. This is a picture of his cute family and all of the children that he and his wife Andrea have. And this is something that they're passionate about, and they want every single family in America to have these resources so that they can plan for their loved one's future and their family's future. So we are Caring Tide. We're a disability planning company. And the way that this company was started was because of Brady's son, Nash. And Nash has Down syndrome. And he also loves school. And one day, Andrea asked Brady, what's our plan for the future? What happens to Nash once we are no longer here? And that started this journey of Brady figuring out the information his family would need and what happens when that school bus stops coming. It's happened to me just last year, because Jackson's now 23. Our post-high school program with our school district has ended, and we've had to really figure out what is Jackson going to be doing during the day, and what can we do to help Jackson have the quality of life that he wants for himself and that he deserves. And then not only what happens when the school bus stops coming, but what will happen to my loved one when I am no longer here to take care of them. Brady was on social media, and he found a mother that had this very question. And she said, I had a revelation today, one that rocked me. I have a 13-year-old amazing yet complicated son with severe nonverbal autism, and lately he has really been struggling in the evenings. Most have no idea. Many probably wouldn't believe it. And today I realized it's not the meltdowns that are breaking me. It's the worry of who will do this after I'm gone. I'm terrified. And then additional mothers kept commenting as well. I'm terrified for the future of my 3-year-old daughter. Who will love and care for her like I do? Another mother said, I feel this. I have 2 boys on the spectrum, and it brings me to tears at the thought of it. And so these are all questions that we think of as parents and as caregivers. And so these are some of the questions that we get that when we're working with families. Some people don't understand what a guardian is. So what is a guardian, and do I need to obtain guardianship? There's 2 different types. There's either limited or full when my child turns 18, or is there an alternative to guardianship? Is that going to be the better fit? What about if there's assets for our family? If there are assets worth more than $2,000 in my child's name, will they lose their public benefits? For example, Social Security and Medicaid. How do I prevent that from happening? And how do I prevent my child from becoming ineligible for benefits? Another question we get is, well, I already have a will, so why is a special needs trust important? And so we walk families through the need to protect their assets and the safest way to do that for our loved ones with a disability. When is the best time to create a special needs trust? And what happens if I die and I don't have a supplemental needs trust? So we'll use those words interchangeably tonight. Sometimes I'll say special needs trust or a third-party supplemental needs trust. Just for the ease of communication tonight, we'll just have it be known as a special needs trust. Is my child automatically kicked off Medicaid? Can I just leave my money and assets to a sibling to use for my loved one's benefit? What's the danger in that? Well, I hear parents say, I'm just going to leave my home to my child. He can live there, and then his brothers and sisters will take care of them. And they don't understand that that home becomes an asset, which would be detrimental to that loved one keeping their Social Security and Medicaid. And we'll get into that tonight. We'll dig in and see what that really looks like. Just a few more. How often should I update my estate planning documents? And we've got it covered. Why should I consider public assistance programs? Some people have a lot of planning done, or maybe they have a lot of assets, and so they don't understand why it's also important for their loved one to tap into things like Medicaid, Medicaid waivers, and Social Security. So if you will just do me a favor and think about your personal situation, what are your biggest questions? What are the things that keep you up at night? What are the things that weigh heavy on your caregiver heart? What are the questions that you just cannot answer? What if you don't have a guardian? What if you don't have any assets to leave to your loved one? How are you going to fund their care? What are the biggest questions? Now keep those questions in your mind. And as we go through the rest of this presentation, hopefully this plan that I outline, these steps, will help you start to answer some of these questions, and we will together create a path forward about how you're going to create your plan. So let's start with number one. The number one concern for parents is, who will care for my child if I can't? And we need to change that a little bit. Who will care for my child when I can't? I think I said if I can't before, but when I can't, because it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time when I physically won't be able to care for my son. I've worked with a mother who was 80 years old, and she talked to me and she said, "What am I going to do? I have a 60-year-old son and I cannot push his wheelchair over the threshold of our home and out to the curb to meet the paratransit." The bus system in their city that carries her son to his day program or to his employment. She physically couldn't do it anymore. Or what about she wasn't able to bathe him anymore? And so that this time will come for everyone. And if we can do the work now to put a plan together, then it's just going to make us feel so much more comforted when we're going through these really hard times. So the key takeaway tonight is the key to your child with a disability thriving long-term is creating a comprehensive care blueprint that combines legal protection, financial planning, and community supports. And without all four, your plan will most likely fail, because even though we all have good intentions, if you don't have the steps and the plan built upon these building blocks that kind of dovetail nicely together, it's more likely that there's going to be a gap and that some aspect of your plan will not be able to come to fruition, and it will fail. So the first step is understanding where you are. The second step is performing an audit. The third step is creating a plan. And the fourth step is to get your house in order. So let's start with number one. First of all, we need to understand where we are on our journey. So it's just like Disneyland. You walk into Disneyland and you're so overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed by the sights and the sounds and the smells. And there's so much going on and so many things you want to do. And you have to pick a land. You have to go to Adventureland or Star Wars Land. And so you have to know exactly where you are in the park in order to get to your destination. Well, it's the same with planning questions and knowing where we are today and just being honest with ourselves. And you know what? It's okay. All of us have work to do. And so if we are honest with ourselves and we can say, okay, this is what my reality looks like. These are the services that I have in place right now. These are the supports I have. And then where do we want to go? Do we want to have our loved one live in our home? Do we want a group home? Do we want other people, caregivers or support staff to come into our home? And how will we get there? The other piece that we want to go on and talk about tonight is, what do I need to consider? So what are the possibilities for our loved ones? You'll see that that question sits in the middle, and then there's all of these topics that we face as caregivers as we navigate life and we create the life for our loved one that we want. So there's things like education. What education opportunities are available to our loved ones after they finish public education? What about housing needs? Are they going to live with us forever? Will they go to live with a sibling? What about if you are like a mom that I worked with in Massachusetts and she does not have anybody to leave her kids to? She's a single mother and that weighs on her every day. What am I going to do with my children when I'm no longer here? What about independence? What can we build into the plan so that our loved ones have as much independence as possible and that autonomy? We want to have high expectations for our loved ones and not limit them. Well, they can't do that or they can't do this. We want to find ways for them to have the life that they want for themselves. What about that financial well-being piece? How are we going to help them pay for that? They may have Social Security and Medicaid, but for instance, my son works a part-time job, but it's not a livable wage. So it would not be enough with his Social Security and his Medicaid to pay for everything. So what can I do to help build in a nest egg that will help to pay for the quality of life that he wants? There's also those pieces to quality of life. What about social relationships, dating, intimacy, so like outings in the community, transportation, how will they get there? Employment, are there opportunities? Can we connect with agencies in our state that will help with programs like job coaching or finding employment that is meaningful and out in the community so that they can have the engagement that they want? Now, with the Caring Tide model, we're a little bit different than other planning organizations. There's great organizations out there, but we think we're the best, and it's because of this model. We take into account every aspect of our loved one's life. So there's those disability resources that we've been talking about. There's also the legal protections. We can put all of these great plans into place, but if we don't have the legal protections there as well, it might be harder for the caregivers to execute the plan for us once we're gone. And then there's also the financial planning piece. And so this could be looking at things like what are our personal resources, what are our government resources or those public benefits like Social Security and Medicaid? What legal documents do we need to create? Is a power of attorney enough, or does our loved one need guardianship or conservatorship? What about a financial plan or ways that insurance policies could help build our estate and provide those assets? And then also the caregiving team. Is it going to be one person, or are there going to be a number of people involved in the plan? And then the last step that we like to include is this arrow. It's not one and done. Family situations change, loved ones pass away, caregivers pass away, people move, maybe our employment situations change. And so those arrows represent this is something that we probably need to review at least once a year. And so with our Caring Tide model, we've built that in for you to help you with that review process. So let's talk about how important the planning is for our families. So this model shows you in red what a traditional family planning model timeline looks like. You have this wonderful baby that enters your family, and then at age 18, they graduate from high school, and you're helping to launch them. You're looking at colleges, you're looking at technical schools, maybe they're taking a gap year. You go through all of this planning with your loved ones. And then you move on to planning for yourself. Someday I want to retire. And so how am I going to do that? How am I going to save enough to be able to retire? And then also planning for my funeral so that I can set aside money for that so that that burden doesn't fall to my children. That's a traditional family planning model. But for our families are a little bit different. And all of those blue arrows will be a disability planning timeline. So we have at birth, like for instance, my journey with my son started when he was 5 months in utero, and we found a brain structure anomaly. And we identified that things were not going to be typical in his life and in our family. And then at age 3, I strapped him into a harness on a special needs school bus, and that just tore my mama heart out that day. Sending my little 3-year-old who was nonverbal off to a preschool program with the school district. And then at age 14, that was challenging as well, going through puberty, dealing with some significant behaviors, getting phone calls from the school every day. And also that's when the transition planning process starts, where the school district starts to help you plan for adulthood for your loved one. So you have conversations about a transition IEP, how to tap into services like vocational rehabilitation or your state's Medicaid waiver system, or learning skills like daily life skills, community skills, riding public transportation, all of those things that happen between age 14 and age 18. And then if you want to apply for Social Security. You can do that before they're age 18, but then it's based off of the caregiver's income, where at age 18, they become a legal adult, and the Social Security is then based off of their income. And then at age 22, when that school bus stops coming, for some people that happens earlier, about age 18, when they either get a certificate of completion or graduation or whatever the graduation options are in your school district or in your state. And then other people end public school at that age 22. And we often think of that as falling off a cliff. All of those services that you've put into place almost their entire time in the school system, they end when that public education ends. And so it's a big, I don't know, it's kind of just like a big shock to parents' systems when you think, okay, what are we going to do not only during the summer, but in the fall when they normally went back to school? What else can we put in place for them? And then, of course, as with anybody, we want to think of how we're growing older. All of us are growing older every day. And so our loved ones will grow older too. And what will we put in place for their retirement and then also their eventual passing and our loved one's death? So these are all things that we need to consider. If you're wondering, okay, where am I in this planning process? On our website at caringtide.com, you can click on the family assessment. There's a quiz tool on our website, and you can take this quiz, and it's just a generalities that you can go through and identify what are some of my pain points, where are some of the gaps in my planning, what have I already tackled, and where am I unsure of for services. So this will give you a really good start. And then if you are concerned, you can book a consultation with us and we will go through that assessment with you and help you understand where some of those gaps are and where the services are that you can use to fill those gaps. So that brings us to step 2, which is to perform a financial review. And I know that that might seem a little overwhelming because, caring for a loved one with a disability is expensive. We pay for medication, we pay for therapy, we're paying for the gaps between what the public benefits cover and what we need to pay for privately. And so it is a process, and we'll take you through that. So it doesn't need to be overwhelming. Again, we want to start with what a traditional family is navigating. A traditional family that's not impacted by disabilities is going to start saving a little bit at a time for emergency funds. They're paying off debt, they're paying off student loans. They're starting as they get older to accumulate more wealth and starting to be able to put some away. They're putting some away in their 401ks or Roths or IRAs, and they're doing retirement planning, and they're really thinking about, okay, do I want to, buy rental properties? Do I want to create an endowment and leave something that represents my values? What are all of the things that I'm wanting to achieve with my planning process? Well, with a family like mine, it's a little bit different, and let me show you. We go through all of those stages in the pyramid, but then there's also other things that we need to consider. We call it life care planning because it's not only the steps that are involved in the pyramid, but we have to think of other components. So what about gifting and inheritance management? Let's say Jackson had a grandpa that left some money and thought he was being really helpful and wanted to help support Jackson's future. And so he left Jackson a little nest egg of money. Well, instead of helping Jackson, that's actually hindering our planning process because that would be an asset for Jackson. And we want to make sure that we don't have anything more than $2,000 in Jackson's name as we are in this planning process so that we don't jeopardize that Social Security and the Medicaid. We also want to think, how much will it cost for a lifetime of support? If I create a special needs trust, there is funding there that would need to be spent to manage the trust, to pay taxes, residential needs, transition plans and building those out, and then also making sure we have cash reserves. We also want to think about what are the goals that we have for Jackson? What's our family mission statement? What are the values that we hold dear? What do we want to have a caregiver emphasize when we are no longer here? What about guardianship or conservatorship or power of attorney or an advanced medical directive? What about all of those special needs planning pieces? So these are all things that we have to consider. We need to talk about two of these tools that can help us with our plan. So here's a little crash course in Medicaid. I know some of you are already using Medicaid and you're already tapped into this, but these are tools that not everyone is familiar with. And unless somebody teaches you these things, unless somebody in the school or a physician or somebody else introduces these concepts to you, a lot of parents do not tap into them. So first of all, Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicare is traditionally a health coverage program for people that are older and also some younger people with disabilities. But for the most part, it's a program for older individuals. So if we think of Medicaid, it's like a house, and there's many ways to get into the house. You can get in through the door, you can get in through the windows, you can get in through a back door. There's lots of ways to get into a Medicaid house. But Medicaid has two distinct programs. One is for healthcare, and that's based mostly upon income. And then the second part of the program is for Medicaid waivers, and these are called HCBS waivers or home and community-based waivers. Now, every state has their own Medicaid waiver program. So if you are in Florida, your program might look different than my program here in Utah. But the general idea behind the Medicaid waiver program is there is an assessment done. Well, first of all, you have to become eligible. So you have to meet your state's eligibility requirements. Once they know that you are eligible and you're applying, they'll do an assessment and say, okay, what would help this individual have a great quality of life? What would help them be safe? What would get them their basic needs? What are all of the components that need to go into place? So they will do an assessment, and based upon that, they will assign different services to your loved one. So maybe that's respite care, maybe it's supported living, maybe there's employment supports there or nursing supports. In Utah, we have several different waivers, and each waiver has different components. So again, this is just a general explanation. We would need to look at your state's waiver system in order to understand what that would mean for your loved one. The other support or the other benefit that's available to people is for SSI. And this is again where individuals cannot have more than $2,000 in assets in their name, and they need to meet Medicaid's definition of a disability. So on the Social Security website, if you have never tried to apply for Social Security, you can go through and see what those requirements are, and we can help you with that. We would need to think about tapping into those to help add to your plan. So you might only be able to save so much, but when we put your financial plan together, we can also add in that Social Security and the Medicaid if they qualify. We also need to think about the cost of adult care supervision. So Medicaid may cover some aspect, but what if your child doesn't qualify for Medicaid? So how much would a day program cost? What about if they were no longer able to live with you and you needed to secure another option for them? Maybe a host home or a group home or some residency program. Maybe you have a lot of assets and so you want to buy a townhome and then bring providers that provide services into the townhome. It's going to look different for everyone. And so what Caring Tide does is we meet you where you are, we look at your situation, and then we help you figure out what a good path forward would be for your loved one based on your situation. We also need to think about medical care and ongoing therapies like speech and occupational therapy. And there's also therapies that aren't necessarily covered. Maybe horseback riding therapy is the best option for your loved one, and they just love that experience. What about maybe an art program or a music program? So we could look at all of those things for you and help you figure out those costs and also what services are available for you in your area. But by and large, the biggest expense is going to be housing. And that is something that all of us have weighing on our minds as well, is where is my loved one going to live? So let's look at an example. Now, the pricing is going to vary based upon where you live in the country. So I'm just going to look at Salt Lake City, Utah, where we live. So the average Social Security is going to be $983 per month. And that's if they're getting their full Social Security. Some people get less than that based upon their circumstances, but let's just say they're getting $983. And the average monthly rent for a basic one-bedroom apartment in Salt Lake is $1,500. And you're thinking, okay, well, that sounds high. If he were to live in a rural area or in a suburban area and just rent a basement apartment, maybe it would be less. So maybe I could find a basement apartment in a suburb for $900 a month. But the problem with that is transportation. So not only do we need to consider housing, but we also need to consider other factors like what does their day look like? Where is their job? How would they get to their job? What about transportation? Across the Wasatch Front, which is the mountain range in Utah, our public transportation runs north and south. So if he was in a suburban area and he was trying to get east and west, it would be really hard for him to get east and west on public transportation. So I would want to make sure I have him in a metro area downtown, thus the higher price for the apartment. So when I'm building my financial plan, I really need to think about where they are living. Where is it going to be? Is it going to be in a rural area? Do we need to build in a private driver? Hopefully, things like Uber and Lyft will have a more secure way for our loved ones to travel. Maybe there'll be something else that we can tap into. But right now, for my situation, this $1,500 apartment would be the best option. What if we need long-term care services for ourselves? So that's going to be very expensive. The national average cost for a skilled nursing home is about $100,000 a year. So do we need to have long-term care coverage for ourselves so that our care doesn't eat up all of the nest egg we're trying to build for our loved one? And that's another option that we need to consider. Will we have to care for our aging parents? Both of my parents recently passed away in 2020 and 2021. They didn't have a lot of life insurance, and so a lot of that responsibility was centered on the siblings, all of their posterity, to help care for that need at the time of their death. And so not only was it caring for them, but also those funeral expenses. And what about myself? Will I be able to retire? I would love to retire and eventually play with my grandkids and do all those things that I want to do with my life. But what am I putting in place now so that I can retire? And what about if we die prematurely? A few years ago, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And after we processed that diagnosis, the first thing that I thought about was, gosh, I hope our short-term life insurance that we bought years ago is still into effect. I don't even know. And I had to go back and check that. And so now we're much more prepared, and we have those resources put into place just in case something happens to one of us. And then the last thing that we want to consider is what will be left for our loved ones' quality of life. So we don't want them to just, have just enough, just the basics. What about, our family traditions? Every year we try to go to the beach at least one time. And so do I want to build that into our family's plan and make sure there's funding in our trust so that Jackson can continue to have that beach trip every year? And, with his rigidity and with his expectations that he has, what can we build in to make sure that quality of life is still there? And then step 3, let's start creating a plan for you. So we have to consider what's on the left, which is our public sources of funding. So things that we've talked about were Medicaid, Medicare, that will help cover the room and board and the personal needs and maybe some care. It just depends on what your loved one qualifies for. So some people, like my son, has sat on a waiting list for that Medicaid waiver for 10 years. And because of the conservative nature of our state, there isn't a lot of funding in our legislature dedicated to funding that Medicaid waiver. And so he continues, because he's higher functioning, to sit on that wait list for services. But other people have higher needs, and so they are able to tap into that Medicaid waiver. So everybody's situation will be different, and we'll have to see what you qualify for on that left side. And then we can supplement it with that right side, with the private sources of funding. There's things like an ABLE account, which is kind of a dedicated savings account for individuals with disabilities. And there's benefits to that, and there's benefits to us to using a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust. Also, that family support, identifying who's in your support network, who are your natural supports. Excuse me. What about things that might not be included? with their insurance, things like dental care, going on vacations, professional fees, computers. Jackson's on the autism spectrum. And so if his computer were to break, because he's very into technology and he's very into politics is his superpower. And so he's always monitoring what's happening in our political landscape. He's really excited for this fall's presidential election. Things like his shampoo, his shaving cream, his haircuts. What are all of the things that we would need to budget for? And so rather than you just thinking, okay, it's going to be fine, I have Social Security and Medicaid, we really have to think of it as a blend of resources. So you have those public benefits that are things like Social Security and Medicaid. You also have your private assets, which would be any funding you can put together with your home or whatever's in your trust, and then we can supplement it with life insurance and have the earnings from your life insurance and the cash value and all of the different annuities and pieces that you put in place go into the special needs trust. And one of the most important pieces people forget are the natural supports. So who's in Jackson's circle? I have two great neighbors that if I'm in a bind or if I'm tied up with a meeting at work, they'll go and pick Jackson up for me. Or he has siblings, but as his siblings get older and they launch and move out of the house, then he has less natural supports. So who else is in Jackson's life? What about his church community or friends that he still keeps in touch with from high school? Who are those natural supports that can be part of his life? The next question that people ask is how much is enough? So you go through all of these things and you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to think, how much can I save in order to prepare for that quality of life and those basic needs for our loved ones? So can you answer this question for your family? And think about it in your mind and think yes or no. Do you have any idea? Have you gone through this planning process? And have you decided how much is enough for you? So the ABLE Act, the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act of 2014, the purpose of this is to provide opportunities for our loved ones to save and to have access to funding. So the basic purpose of this ABLE account is to put money aside that will be kept safe and not disqualify our loved ones from Social Security and Medicaid. And if we put it in an ABLE account, Social Security and Medicaid don't look at that. So a beneficiary can have only one ABLE account. So Jackson can't have two, you can only have one. And the great thing about it is you can contribute up to $18,000 per year. That's the new guideline for 2024. And then if he's working, which he is, he can contribute additional money to the ABLE account. And he uses it in Utah. We're part of the Utah ABLE, and so he would utilize it through what's called a stable card. It's like a debit card, and he would use it for anything that's an eligible expense. So anything that's for his benefit, whether it's new clothing or a haircut, he would just use this stable card, the debit card, and it accesses the funds in the ABLE account. So there's a couple of downsides. You can have up to about $100,000 in the account before your SSI would be paused. And then once your balance goes below that, then you could reactivate your SSI. So that's one thing you want to consider is how much you're going to put in that account. And then also there's a Medicaid payback provision. And so if Jackson were to pass away and he had been utilizing Medicaid services, Medicaid would then go look at the ABLE account to see if there's any funds in that account, and it would pay back the portion that we used from Medicaid. So if he had used $25,000 since the time he opened his ABLE account for Medicaid, then they would take $25,000 to pay that back. So there's also maximums. You can, even though you'll lose that Social Security, it will be paused once you reach 100,000. There are also plan limits, and that would range, depend upon your plan that you select, between 235,000 and 500,000. So you would definitely want to look at the bottom there, the National ABLE link that I have at the bottom, and you can go onto their site and you can look at every state's ABLE account and see which program is the best for you. So maybe you live in Nevada, but you want to participate in Ohio's plan. You can do that. And there's benefits too, because there's tax benefits and also investment benefits that come with the ABLE account. So be aware of that. You also want to make sure you are using it for appropriate use. So you want to make sure that it gives your loved one an opportunity to be independent, where Jackson can use his debit card and, be empowered to use his money for his needs. But we also want to make sure that we're taking into account that where you're using it, whether it's for goods and services for his needs rather than like rent, because you don't want to risk the chance of reducing your Social Security payment. So we can help you work through those things as well. Now, there are things that you need to consider as far as from an estate planning purpose, because there is that Medicaid payback option or Medicaid payback restriction. We want to be very mindful about how much we are going to be putting into our ABLE account, because the best tool for saving is going to be that third-party supplemental needs trust, or what we call a special needs trust. And that will prevent the Medicaid payback if it's in the third-party supplemental needs trust. And then also its access, what's going to be the benefit in the long run. If it's just for things like haircuts and clothing and his needs, then maybe I want to put just a little bit of money in there, and then also put the rest of the bigger money into the third-party supplemental needs trust. The ABLE account is also a great way for, like, if Grandpa wanted to give Jackson birthday money, that would be a great way for other people to help contribute to the savings options for Jackson. So as we think about how much we need to save and how we're going to do it, let's go through some scenarios here to kind of get your mind working. So here's Marty. Marty is 17 years old today and his parents are 54 and 53. They want him to have about $4,000 per month to live on from his age 25 to the end of his life. And it will take about $3 million from when his dad dies at age 85 to support Marty from the time his age is 48 to the time Marty is 85. And now you'll see there at the bottom, we're assuming that there's a 6% annual compound return on assets. We're taking into account inflation. We're taking into account some Social Security disability insurance that his dad has, and all of these other factors for this hypothetical situation. So here are some possible funding strategies. You could invest a lump sum today of $620,000, earning an assumed net of 6% every year. That might not be an option for everyone. Maybe you don't have that big of a nest egg sitting around. So other options could be to allocate via estate planning any assets remaining at the time of your death. So that could be like a home or savings accounts or life insurance policies. Those are all assets that could go into your trust. And again, we're not leaving them to Jackson. If I leave my home to Jackson, that becomes an asset to Jackson, and then he will not be able to qualify for Medicaid and Social Security. Utilize life insurance. There's a variety of insurance options. So we could have you work with Max, our financial planner, and identify what those options would be. You could work with us to help you open an ABLE account for your loved one who qualifies. Let's think of some out-of-the-box strategies too. We're not advocating credit card debt, but there are some saving options. So with my debit card, you can round up. Let's say I went to Walmart and spent $19.50, and then I could round that extra 50 cents up to $20 and put that into a dedicated savings account. So every time I'm charging something, I could save a little bit as well. And you can save what you can every single month, and also credit card rewards. For instance, at the end of the year, I'll get a check from Costco that says you have this much money to put towards your purchases at Costco. And then whatever my budget was for Costco, I can put into a savings account. So here's another example. Did you know that if you save $20 each month for 1 year, you will save $1,040 a year? And that can be leveraged to buy life insurance with a larger death benefit over the years. So there's a lot of different ways that we can try to help you reach these goals. Some other options are for this 2-income stream family. So Bob and Susan are both 35 and they have 3 children. One of their children, Shane, has disabilities and needs lifetime supports. Shane is also 10 years old, and together they earn $150,000 annually. So here are some things that Bob and Susan could do. Make sure that Shane is eligible for Social Security and Medicaid. Again, at age 18, they become an independent adult, and so they would qualify on their own based upon their income. And that's when you also want to make sure that you've taken care of any assets in their name and that you've moved those before you apply. You could purchase group term life insurance on both parents through your employers. Those are typically relatively inexpensive, so that's an easy way to get some life insurance so you at least have something. You would also want to have a will and a revocable trust drafted. And you would also want to add that special needs trust piece on for Shane specifically. And then make sure all of your beneficiary designations are coordinated with the estate plan. So again, the home is in a trust. My husband's life insurance policy, once I pass away, then it goes into the trust. You want to make sure all of the assets get put into the trust and not left in people's names. And then also open the ABLE account and start contributing to the ABLE account. This is another option that is sometimes a good option for people. You would secure a survivorship whole life policy on both parents' lives. So it's that permanent insurance rather than just term. Term is where it's only lasts for so many years. So let's say I bought a policy and it's good for 20 years. Well, what happens at the end of that 20 years? Will I still be eligible for insurance? You know, in our situation, my husband had cancer. Our term life insurance was coming to an end, and now it's probably going to be more expensive for us to secure insurance because he's had cancer. So those are things that you do need to consider. There's another component to it where it pays only after the second parent dies. And then typically it can be less costly than a 2 individual whole life plans. And the special needs trust would be the beneficiary after that second parent passes away. So another option, a single parent option. So Sally Sample is a 35-year-old single mom. Her daughter is 10-year-old Lindsay with disabilities and requires a lifetime of supports. So Sally has a stretched budget and she's trying to manage things on her own. So we would want to make sure that Lindsay qualifies for that Social Security and Medicaid. And because of their income situation, they may even qualify for Social Security and Medicaid prior to Lindsay's birthday. So make sure Lindsay has never had more than or doesn't have $2,000 in her name. And you would want to contact an estate planning attorney to draft that trust, the will and the trust, to make sure those pieces are in place so that there's someone to care for Lindsay in the event that Sally passes away. You could also purchase that group term life insurance on her life on Sally's life through Sally's job. And then the beneficiary should be the will of the insured. So we just want to, again, make sure that those assets are not going to into Lindsay's name. Okay, and then you could purchase either term life insurance or permanent life insurance. And again, the beneficiary should be the will of the trust, and make sure any retirement plans have that proper beneficiary arrangement as the will of the account owner. If there's not that special needs trust in place, if that's too expensive for them to put together right away. So another thing that Sally could do would be to purchase permanent life insurance on her life that can provide a death benefit with the ability to increase over time. So there's a lot of options out there when it comes to life insurance. And Max can show you those options and let you know which one is the best way to go for your situation. And then also coverage designed to stay in force as long as the insured lives, and a cash value that can grow over time, and a cash value that can grow without taxation. So if you have questions on those pieces, make sure and request a consultation with us. I'll show you the link at the end, and we can really walk through these options for you. The other thing that Sally could do is to save or invest $50 per month in an ABLE account. So, you know, canceling Netflix or, you know, maybe getting one less cup of coffee that week. But after 11 years, and by the time Lindsay is 21, there will be approximately $9,000, a little bit more than that. And then after the 20 years, and by the time Lindsay is 30, there will be approximately $23,000 there. So while it's not a lot, even $50 a month can grow over time. If Sally invests $100 per month in an ABLE account for 11 years, by the time Lindsay is 21, there will be approximately 18,000, and then after 20 years, there will be approximately 46,000. So that just shows you, even just with a little bit of savings, how much you can accumulate for your child. or your loved one that you're caring for. But the hardcore truth is that we will all have an expiration date on our mortality, and we have three choices on how to handle that reality. We can deny it, we can ignore it, or we can plan for it. And that's from Scott Page. It's never too late. So that fourth step is to put your house in order. And so by working with Caring Tide as our partner and as our client, we will go through this planning process with you. And so we're going to meet you where you are. We're going to address all of these primary issues and figure out what is your starting point. And then we're going to go through and have a mission statement created. And what are those values for your family? What are we going to do to identify what you want your future to look like? And so this is a sample. This was Brady's example, and their mission statement would be always there to always care, always loving and supporting each other no matter what, and strive to show kindness. So you want to think about what is important to your family and what can you build into the plan to make sure those pieces are there. This is the next piece that we'll go through with you is the letter of intent. And so what are the possibilities for your loved one's life? So there's the family history. We'll start over there at the family history and say, okay, this is what is the history of Jackson's mother, Jackson's father, and his siblings. And these are all of the things that have taken place. This is Jackson's medical care, that general overview of what life looks like right now. What supports do we have in place? What about religious preference? What does Jackson want to do during the week for that religious connection? Or maybe religion isn't important to your family. Make sure that's outlined so that nothing is pushed on your child that they don't want to participate in. What about those social connections or the residential and social? How can we find housing, but also make sure it incorporates social connections? And then again, employment, education. What about tricky behavior? What if there's volatile situations? What about if there's dual diagnosis with mental health there? And then, of course, what about the final arrangements? And so we go through and help you understand not only the components of the letter of intent, but also kind of some of the limitations where it's not legally binding. This is just giving your potential caregiver all of the things that you would put in Jackson's guidebook. If you wanted someone to know everything about Jackson or your loved one, what would you want to include? So these are a couple of different points that you would want to consider. You know, it creates this basis for your child's team, and it paves the transition for those that will follow you in helping your child continue with your desired outcomes and goals. The next thing we'll have you do is we'll have you meet with a disability navigator, and they will meet you where you are, identify where you're struggling, and then source resources for your state, for your community, and for the areas where you have gaps. You know, maybe you've done a lot of work. Maybe you are a caregiver who's really put in the time to dig in to understand what the disability community looks like in your state. And that is so awesome. Like you are just nailing it. But there's always generally things that we can find to help supplement. Maybe it's time to update your loved one's person-centered plan. Maybe you're not familiar with that term. Maybe there's things where we can set goals and help your loved one achieve those goals. What about transportation? What about employment? What about tapping into vocational rehabilitation resources and getting started with like an education program or a technical trade school? There's always different things that we can try to find to help supplement what you've already put in place. The next step would be to meet with our financial planner. This is Max. And one thing I want to point out about Max is, you know, again, there's financial planners all over the place that are fabulous, but make sure you're working with someone who understands the needs of your family. And Max will be a chartered special needs consultant when you work with him. And so he has taken special training to understand what the needs are of families like mine. He knows the questions to ask, and he knows what to put in place in the financial plan to answer that question, how much do I need to save? So when you're working with someone, make sure they have that special training and that it's not just a regular financial planner who might not be familiar with the needs and requirements of our family. And then Caring Tide is another, our attorney that also sets us apart from other organizations. Because a lot of financial planners, they only do the financial plan for you. But with Caring Tide, we're helping you navigate your disability resources. We're helping you with your financial plan through a chartered special needs consultant. And then we're also helping you with your estate plan so that you can get that special needs trust set up. So this is just a quick bullet list of all of the different aspects that we cover. And this is not an all-inclusive list. We really can help you with any aspect that you're struggling with. So what about transitioning your loved one from pediatric healthcare over to adult healthcare? Can they navigate that on their own? Have they already created something called a medical notebook for themselves where they're tracking their labs and their medications and their specialists? Do they understand how to make those appointments? Or is there support that we can give you there to help your loved one receive that training? What about your support? It's that whole thought of putting your oxygen mask on first, and then you can help your loved one. Because caregiver fatigue is real, especially when you're dealing with mental health and you're dealing with all of these taxing pieces. Some days you're really nailing it, and other days it's really challenging and you're almost in tears, or you are in tears and you just want it to stop and you don't know how you can move forward one more day. And how is this going to be sustainable year after year? And so Caring Tide is really able to get into those caregiver support tools that you need and try to help you find the resources you need for your own care. What about daily life skills? We have awesome resources where we can go through and help your loved one work on their skills and provide resources and training and tools in your area that can help them achieve additional skills. You know, because even if your loved one is able to make a piece of toast, that's an employable skill. Making toast is an employable skill. So we go through this entire list. Those are just a few of the pieces, and we help your family get the resources they need. So let's review. First, we need to understand where we are. So we do that resource maximization checkup. We really evaluate what you have in place right now, and we identify where there might be some gaps or where you might need support. And then we perform that audit where we take a look at your financial plan and really dig into it and say, okay, perfect. You have all of these pieces set up. Or you know what? It's okay if you don't have them set up. Let's figure out how we can make that happen for you. And then after we go through and perform the audit, the next piece is we're going to create that plan. We're going to look at your estate plan. What do you already have in place? Do you have a will? Do you have power of attorney? Do you have advanced healthcare directives? What about guardianship and conservatorship? Where do you live in the United States? What are the laws? What is the process for going through and getting guardianship in your state? How can we help you do that? How can we help you outline your options? Well, what about if guardianship isn't the best option for you? Did you know there's alternatives to guardianship? You know, a lot of times when we're in our IEP meetings and our child is turning 18, we might hear, oh, you need to get guardianship. Well, we can go through and give you some options, and then you can determine what is the best option for your loved one. Do you need full guardianship? Do you need limited guardianship? Or is there an alternative to guardianship that might be the best option for you? So as we're going through these options, the last step is to get your house in order. And so again, through our Caring Tide process, we're going through those disability resources, we're going through those legal supports that we can build in, and then also that financial planning piece. So I know that's a lot of information. We've come to the end of our presentation tonight, but hopefully as we've gone through this, you've been able to think about where your family is and maybe what are the gaps that you would like to address with your plan. And so if you wanted to work with Caring Tide, if all this did by working with us is to give you peace of mind, knowing that you have a plan in place for your child, would it be worth it for you? And so I want to thank you for coming tonight. This is our Caregiver National Resource Directory. And tomorrow, after our team is back in the office, we'll go through the list tonight and see who was able to attend, and we will put that in your email box. We'll email that to you. And so I want you to think about your questions and think about where you need support. And I want to give you an opportunity to work with us. These are places where you can follow more of our information. We have an Instagram and we also have a Facebook page. On Instagram, you can follow us at Caring Tide. And on Facebook, it is The Caring Tide. But we're often posting resources and information to families there. So you can follow us there. And then if there's something tonight that made sense to you, that clicked with you, that maybe prompted you, hey, I need to work on this, this is a link to set up a free consultation. So there's no obligation. I'll just meet with you and we'll go through it together and figure out, okay, I'm here. This is where we are, and we're really stressed. Or, you know what, I'm here and we already have a lot of this put into place. Nothing you said was new, but I really just want to talk with you to see if there's additional things that we can identify for our family's plan. So wherever you fall on that spectrum of support for your loved one, we would love to meet with you and see if there's something we can do to help your family. So I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate your time. We value your time. I just know that this information is important to families. There will be a time when I am no longer here to care for Jackson, and I want to make sure that as a mom, I have been the best advocate as possible for him. Not only all throughout his life with his IEP and with connecting him with resources and getting him signed up for waitlists with services, but also for when I'm no longer here. What am I going to do to make sure that my sweet boy has all of those tools and resources he needs to have the life I envision for him, and also the life that he envisions for himself? And so by going through this planning process and doing our due diligence now, it just gives me such relief, and I'm able to sleep better at night because I've done this planning and I'm dedicating the time and the energy and the resources to do it. And I want everyone to know that it's not just something that can be done quickly. It takes bandwidth, right? We all don't have unlimited time or money to prepare for our loved one's future. And so that's what's great about Caring Tide is we meet you where you are, and then we do it according to what works for you. So if you're stressed about this one piece, like let's figure out guardianship and let's work on that first. What about getting you signed up for Social Security and Medicaid? Okay, let's do that next. Okay, now let's look at our resources and make sure we have some assets to put into our special needs trust to care for Jackson. And then let's create that special needs trust and let's make sure those pieces are in place. Let's identify who the caregivers will be. Let's write that letter of intent. Let's figure out all the components. How are we going to manage the trust? Who's going to be the trustee and the executor? We'll help you figure all of that out. So take a shot of that QR code, schedule that appointment with me, and let's take a look to see how we can help your family answer that question. Who will care for my loved one when I'm no longer here? Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate your time.